Welcome to Module 3 of the Administration Code Regulation Training 703 KAR 5080. My name is Shara Savage, a Program Consultant in the Office of Assessment and Accountability, or OAA. During Module 3, we will look at appropriate assessment practices, such as the required training for administering a state assessment. The Administration Code applies to all state-required pieces of the accountability system using paper or pencil, computers, or digital technology. Anyone with the potential to be involved with any component of state-required testing must be trained on the Administration Code regulation before beginning the work. This could include, but is not limited to, principals, off-grade teachers, substitutes, accommodation providers, librarians, etc. Individuals providing accommodations to special needs students must also receive training on the Inclusions of Special Populations regulation. Volunteers involved in state testing, such as providing accommodations or helping with proctoring, must meet certain stipulations that also apply to school staff. No student may administer a state assessment. This includes peer tutoring. All volunteers must have Administration Code and Inclusions of Special Populations training and sign non-disclosure forms. Volunteers must be under the strong oversight of a certified person who will be responsible for the test administration. Suppose there should be a testing allegation involving a volunteer. In that case, the certified person, BAC or proctor, in charge of the testing environment must be submitted on the allegation report. Schools and districts may use materials provided by the Kentucky Department of Education or locally produced. Solely reading the regulation and signing the paper signature page at the end of the document shall not be considered adequate training. Training shall include interactions regarding the content of the regulation with supporting examples and situations, the opportunity to ask questions, etc. The intent or meaning of interaction is for the training to be more than being assigned to read and sign the document. The DAC-BAC manual and TAMS are the guiding documents for test administration procedures. Reading the TAMS is expected as part of the required training. Following vendor test administration manuals is of the utmost importance. Districts are charged with maintaining records of individuals receiving Administration Code training. The participants' records may be maintained through collecting individuals' signature sheets found on the last page of the Administration Code regulation document, or by the retention of group training attendance signature pages. Copies of the signature page or group training attendance sheet may be maintained in hard copy or electronic format. A copy of the group signature sheet is available on the KDE website. Training participants are held professionally accountable for their actions after signing either type of signature sheet. Notice that both sheets state, by signing, I acknowledge having received a copy of the Administration Code for Kentucky's Educational Assessment Program 703 KAR 5080 and have participated in training for this regulation. I also agree to comply with the complete content of the regulation and understand that I will be held professionally accountable. Anyone assisting with testing will sign a non-disclosure form. Assistance includes handling testing materials, escorting students, providing accommodations, and more. Discussions or sharing test content details with others, even though they have been trained and are participating in test administration, is not allowed. Non-disclosure forms can be found on the Forms page in the Accountability and Assessment section of the KDE website. Resources and materials available to students during testing are dependent upon the assessment. Please check the Test Administration Manual for further guidance on what should be at a student's workstation during testing. During an assessment, test administrators shall not distribute, make available or attach students' workstations any information or materials that are not sent as part of the assessment materials or specified in the test administration manual or a student's plan. Examples of not acceptable resources include copies of acronym sheets or sheets of paper containing a system for organizing answers, textbooks, computer tools, or other reference resources. This includes printed copies of writing rubrics. A student's IEP, 504, or PSP allow the student to have additional resources not mentioned in the script. Please check with your BAC concerning accommodations. If using test booklets, blank writing or graph paper, clear or colored overlay sheets, and bookmarks free of content are allowed at the student's workstation. Some schools use brightly colored pieces of paper or district or school supplied bookmarks to mark where testing will stop in a session. If using the online test, blank writing or graph paper are allowed at student workstations. Additionally, students have access to the online tool available in TestNav, such as the calculator, dictionary, contrast tool, and much more. Whether or not a dictionary or thesaurus is allowed on a test will be covered in the Test Administration Manual or the TAM. Test administrators should refer to the listing of approved and unapproved materials in the TAM to determine when to provide a resource. On-demand writing is the only content area where a student is allowed to have a dictionary or thesaurus. Online testing provides an electronic dictionary or thesaurus to each student. A classroom set of dictionaries or thesauri should be available for students for paper pencil testing or as a backup for online testing. Reading, mathematics, science, or social study content area tests do not allow the use of a dictionary or thesaurus unless clearly stated as an accommodation in a student's plan. It is a local decision by schools or districts on whether to allow students access to non-content related materials, such as books or puzzles, after the student has turned in his or her testing materials to the test administrator. Please note that this is after a student has no testing materials at the workstation. Calculators may be used in more than one content area. Check the TAM to determine if a calculator is allowed or if this test section is a no calculator math test. Online testing will provide the student with the type of calculator needed for that test session. It is expected that the student will use the online calculator and not a handheld calculator unless the student's accommodations plans specifies using a handheld calculator. Handheld calculators used for paper, pencil, or accommodated testing should adhere to the KDE calculator policy, which is available on the KDE website. Be familiar with the requirements of each assessment that you administer. Some test vendors have calculator policy requirements that differ from KDE's, such as the ACT. KDE recommends that school provides calculators for each student that meets the current calculator acceptable use criteria. However, students can use their own approved calculators for paper pencil test. Test administrators are responsible for ensuring that communication and internet capabilities are disabled during testing sessions. This also includes turning off a computer algebraic system on the calculator. See the KDE calculator policy for more details. It is not acceptable for students within the same testing session to share calculators, even if the test administrator clears the program between uses. There should be a 1-to-1 ratio of calculators to students during a test session. Allegation tip. Plan ahead of time to have all necessary related materials such as dictionaries, thesauri, calculators, etc. needed for testing both accommodated and general education students. However, it is critical to review the test administration manual to check to see which materials are allowed for a test session, as the policy does differ per vendor, such as the ACT. ACT allows students to use either the online calculator or an approved handheld calculator. Internet access is necessary for computer-based testing, but consistent changes in personal technology make our job of maintaining a fair and unbiased testing environment harder. Using electronic devices or the internet is unacceptable to gain a testing advantage. Online testing provides a secure browser to prevent accessing other parts of the internet, therefore not allowing a student to gain an unfair advantage during testing. Except for in cases where allowed, such as online testing in a secure browser, students should not have access to the electronic devices until all testing in the building is completed to ensure that students are not communicating with others in testing sessions. Smartwatches or Fitbits are not allowed since those devices can connect to the internet. Online testing can be conducted by trained staff in person. Remote testing is not acceptable with any state testing. Off-site testing is acceptable practice with online and paper testing. As a reminder, in-person online testing can only be conducted by trained staff. Please ensure that the testing environment is free of content, only the student and trained staff are present, and the student does not have additional internet devices in the room. It is acceptable for the test administrator to use electronic devices to contact school administrators regarding test sessions. Example, problems with materials, student illness, administration questions, breaks, etc. BACs or principals may routinely request that teachers use their personal cell phones to notify the office of a need in a classroom. However, neither students nor test administrators shall use electronic devices such as, but not limited to, cell phones, tablets, e-readers for personal reasons during testing sessions except in the case of emergency. Test administrators should be communicating with the building assessment coordinator or designee for assistance with the situation in the classroom and not each other while testing is occurring. Allegation alert. A student has hidden a cell phone in the pocket of a hoodie. The student takes the picture of the test and places it on social media. This would be an example of an allegation of lack of monitoring a student using an electronic device during testing and accessing the internet during the test administration. As best practice, test administrators should have students power down their cell phones and place them in their backpack or out of sight. And additionally, ensure proper monitoring is being conducted throughout the testing session. We have looked at cell phones, electronic devices, etc. Let's move on to the testing environment. A few years ago, when this regulation was updated, it was decided that the testing room surfaces should be free of content during operational and field testing. Yes, this means bulletin boards, walls, all surfaces. It is acceptable to place instructional materials on bulletin boards, walls, etc. throughout the year, but when the room is used for testing, those same content materials must be removed or covered. Covered means with a covering that is not see-through or opaque. Some examples of materials are any content information or strategies for solving problems. These may be anywhere in the room: walls, ceiling, floors, windows, and clothing. Yes, clothing. When the room wasn't required to be sanitized, some schools printed t-shirts with content on them for the student. Sounds like a great idea. I can read your back, you can read mine, but what about the poor person in the front row? He doesn't have a shirt to read. He is now at a disadvantage. You could say the same thing about posters. If I was sitting next to a poster that just happened to have an answer to one of my test questions, I had an advantage over the person across the room who was too far away to read the poster. The covering of the content in the room did get a bit extreme. To make sure that all students had the same resources and advantages, the posters had to go. Let's take a closer look at some of these materials. Motivational posters or materials without content and standard periodic tables can remain on the walls. Periodic tables? Yes. Periodic tables without additional content. It does not give you an advantage if you do not understand how to read a periodic table. Materials appropriate for instruction and display may not be appropriate during testing sessions. Materials that contain content, problem-solving strategies, processes, etc. are unacceptable for display or use during testing sessions. Even things painted on the walls, three-dimensional sculptures, or paintings used in a lesson must be covered. It is now time for a third check for understanding. I will give you a couple minutes to read through these yes or no questions, and then we will discuss the answers. Okay, number 1. Is it acceptable for a teacher to use his or her personal cell phone to communicate with each other about a testing situation in the classroom? No. It is not acceptable for a teacher to use his or her personal cell phone to communicate with another teacher about testing situation in the classroom. Number 2. Is it acceptable to allow general education students to use a handheld calculator instead of the online calculator? No, it is not acceptable to allow a student to use handheld calculators instead of the online calculator, unless the online calculator is not functioning or the student has a disability requiring a handheld calculator. Additionally, the only other exception is if the vendor policy differs from KDE. Be sure to check your TAM for instructions. Number 3, is it acceptable to leave content on the wall in the testing room when administering a field test? No, it is not acceptable to leave content visible during any state assessment, operational, or a field test. Number 4, is it acceptable to allow students to read library or personal books as each student finishes and test materials are collected? Yes, it is acceptable to allow students to read library or personal books as each student finishes and test materials are collected. However, this is a local decision to allow this practice or not. This concludes Module 3 of 6 of the Administration Code Regulation. Please review all 6 modules to complete the Administration Code training. If you have questions, please contact us at KDE DAC Information at dacinfo@education.ky.gov or give us a call at 502-564-4394. Thank you for participating in this section of the training with the Office of Assessment and Accountability.